When I'm auditing podcasts, one of the things that I look at is branding and marketing. And honestly, this is where I have a lot of feedback. So today I am speaking with Bethany McCamish all about branding and what you can do to make your podcast stand out, show up better, and just look more professional. Branding is one of those things that so many people overlook. And honestly, if you want your podcast to do better, this is one of the ways to make that happen. Check out all the links in the show notes and enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Podcast Cafe, where we're serving up everything you need to know about podcasting, from tips, stories, and strategies for podcasters from podcasters. I'm your host, Haley Hayhurst, the founder of Espresso Podcast Production, a full-service podcast agency helping business owners, creatives, and thought leaders launch and grow their shows. Whether you're just starting out or want to take your podcast to the next level, this is the place for you. Each week, we'll dive into practical tips, actionable strategies, and of course, stories from other podcasters so that you can build up a podcast that you love and that works for your business. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's get started. Welcome to the Podcast Cafe. Hey, Bethany, thank you so much for joining me in the Podcast Cafe. I'm so excited for you to be here today.
I'm so excited to be here too. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And so my very first question I'm asking all my guests is, what is your go-to coffee order?
Oh my gosh. I'm one of those people who changes my coffee order all the time. Literally my regular at the place, they always have to ask. But right now, it is a cinnamon dolce latte with oat milk and an extra shot.
Yum. Oh my gosh. That sounds so good. That's what I think I need right at this moment.
Yes. Well, after this, go get yourself one.
I love that. Awesome. Well, today we're talking all about podcast branding and your podcast and all of the good stuff. So why don't you start off by telling us more about your background and your business and your podcast?
Yeah. So I guess we'll rewind it back to undergrad days. So I have a BFA, and that's where I started to dive into all things design and also understanding the impact that image has on our perceptions and really the world. So that's my fine arts background, but also rooted in a lot of design and art principles. And then I went on and got my master's degree at grad school. While I was at grad school, I worked in industry. And then right after grad school, I went straight into teaching, and I was able to teach graphic design, photography, and film studies. And I did that for about 5 years. But 3 years into that, I was like, really needing to pay off those student loans. So I started side hustling and doing basically what I was teaching on the side. And I decided to take it super seriously in 2018 and do it, like, see if I could replace my teacher paycheck. That was my goal. And I did. And then I quit teaching, went full time in 2019, also moved states that year. It was a lot happening. And then I haven't looked back since. And now I own a brand and web design agency. We work to elevate women's voices and visibility. And that's what I do day in and day out. And I love it.
Awesome. I love that. I really love that story. And so when did you start your podcast?
So I started my podcast, I guess it's almost 2 years ago now, which is exciting.
Yeah.
It's called Unbreakable Brands. And I started it as something to go alongside and support what my brand and web design agency was doing, and also to help start building the foundation to be seen as more than a service provider, but a thought leader within the space. I knew that a podcast could also help me in terms of like securing speaking gigs and things like that in the future. So I decided to do it. And I love that too, even though it's a little more of a labor of love because it was very new to me.
I love that. And I think, as we've talked about in the past, like, podcast branding is something that a lot of businesses ignore. And they don't even mean to. I mean, they might take time to figure out their own branding for their business, but then when they add a podcast, or maybe they're a hobby podcaster, they think of it as a different part of their business. And so what I help a lot of businesses do is connect the two, right? Your podcast and your business should have the same audience. They should be working towards the same goal. So I'm sure I see a lot of podcasts, I'm sure you do too, where the branding, like, they might have beautiful, like, branding for their business, and then for their podcast it's like a bunch of random Canva templates that are like different colors then, or no branding at all. Horrifying.
Yeah. A nightmare.
A nightmare, yes. So can you tell us what the foundational pieces of like branding for your podcast are?
Yeah, absolutely. But I was laughing about this in our first conversation because we were talking about, I think the natural assumption is that this is obviously a, audio medium first. So I think the natural assumption is to like, why put in the effort or the time or who cares because who's going to see it? But I mean, like a lot of the work you do and promote for your clients is that they have video as a component of their podcast, and it doesn't just exist in one form anymore. And so I think that the visual piece gets overlooked because people are thinking it's just sound and they'll like pay for the mic, but not the branding, but it goes hand in hand. And I think, there's more times that I will listen to an episode because the cover art looks good than like actually reading the description or just trying it.
Yeah.
So I want to throw that out there that like, there is reason to do it that will actually impact the success of your podcast. But I think in terms of building that foundation, one, having a really clear audience in mind and marrying that with the overall purpose of your podcast and what that's going to do for your brand or business. And like you were saying, you could have a podcast that is the brand, like it exists on its own, which, a lot of the big podcasts like grew into their own brands, or you could have a podcast that comes alongside your business to support it. And that's what I would call a sub brand. So whenever you're thinking of it, it's, underneath your overall brand umbrella, but it supports it in some way. Similar to how people have a signature offer, a signature course, your podcast is just as much a part of your company if its purpose is to support the work that you do. And so I think if you know your audience ahead of time and then you know what you want it to do, and by that I don't mean, I want this many downloads and this many people to listen, because that's really not a purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess fame, but your purpose is like, is it to bring in clients? Is it to connect with a community and grow a community because you have a membership? Like, how is it actually going to relate to your brand or business and the work that you do? And having those defined first then means that when you get to the visuals, you can be really intentional with them and make sure that they actually have meaning and back up your intent instead of jumping into like my favorites or, colors that you just saw online that you liked. I think it's really important to have that approach to it. Just like you would with branding your business, you should also be considering those things. It's not necessarily different just because the medium is a little bit different,
Yeah, exactly. That's so true. And podcast logos, like you were saying, like the cover art, it's an important like first step to having a podcast. Now, I will say for my clients, like, and people in the podcast world, a lot of people can get stuck on this. So like, don't get stuck on it, but do pay attention to it. Right. And just like you were saying, you listen to the ones that you like the cover art. I'm the same way. If I'm looking for a podcast about like running is a new hobby of mine. So I've been looking into running podcasts, and definitely what stands out are the ones with nice logos, because I don't know, it's just like the storefront. If we were thinking about shopping in a mall or something, like you have all these options, and definitely the ones with the better branding. Of course, the content's important, but the branding is so important. That's like the first impression that people have of you.
Totally. It's part of your production. And I think people just like leave it off. But
Yeah.
I mean, that's really your first impression, and it should be a part of your overall production, because I'm assuming when I'm scrolling podcasts that if you've put the effort into building a solid brand and have a nice cover art and all of these things that are thought out, then that also means the production of your show is going to be pretty good and also worth my time. Like, I'm willing to give that because I can see that you already gave a little bit of thought and effort. And I also want to say, on the note of like your logo on your podcast cover art, I think that's kind of a big maybe not a mistake, but sometimes here's what I see. Business owners just like pick one of their brand colors, put it in the background, and take their own business logo and just like put it on the front.
Yeah.
And then, but then the name, I've seen this so many times, but then the name of the podcast is something different, right? And so people are like, what is this actually about? You know what I mean? So I do want to say you should have a separate mark suite, logo suite for your podcast. It should flow with your business if it's supporting it. Like it should look like it's all a part of the same, grouping. But your own business name or logo is not going to necessarily even be important or even end up on the cover. Like maybe it'll be like hosted by, it, at the bottom small. But I think that's just an easy like mistake to make of introducing it as your business and brand because you know it, but nobody has any idea what that is when they're finding you.
Exactly.
Podcast.
Exactly. Or like something I've been seeing a lot lately is people will like emphasize the word podcast rather than like the name of the podcast. And it's like, of course it's a podcast. Oh my gosh. I feel like a hater sometimes, but I have big feelings about everything in the podcast space.
Yeah. No, it's so, and then like even choosing the graphic of like the giant microphone. And I'm like, but we know because we're the only time we're seeing the cover art is when we're already listening to the podcast. But I do know what you mean too by having it be like, the podcast is the big word. It's kind of crazy. I think that could be fun for like, okay, if you have real covers on Instagram, you could make it more emphasized, but like maybe not your cover art.
For sure. No. So going back to your podcast, what is an Unbreakable brand and how did you come to the name of it? And really, what made you want to start this podcast?
Yeah. So I have a lot of things to say, which is really what I had been told by quite a few people. I had a business coach and just even clients I was working with, like, oh my gosh, I love your reels or your opinions on these things. Or when we had a strategy call, they'd be like, wow, do you have a podcast? Like, I want to hear more about it. And I was honestly, to be totally transparent, I was like anti doing a podcast for myself at first because I was like, I don't know, like if I have the time. I put out so much free content already as business owners, we usually do. And I was like, is this really something I want to do or add to my plate? But I did feel like at the time there was a lot of demand. And at that same time, I also get, I call it my like burn it all down feeling that I get about every 2 years. And I don't want to actually burn anything down. I've talked about that. Like I want to keep my brand equity and I do love what I do. But for me, that comes from like a need to feed my curiosity, to learn something new and to try something different. And so that was all coinciding with this. And I was like, fine, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to try it. And if I hate it, it's totally fine. I didn't. I ended up really loving it. I loved especially I loved interviewing people and just putting together seasons that I thought would be super helpful and answering questions I get all the time and breaking things down in a little bit longer of a format. So I loved all the pieces that came with it. It was just kind of getting over myself initially and being like, okay, I'm just going to do it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and that's totally fine. But it ended up working really well for me in a very specific way, which we can talk about. But the name Unbreakable Brands, well, one, I needed to be able to trademark it. So I worked with my lawyer, so it's trademarked now, which is great, as I wanted full ownership of that. But I had a lot of meaningful conversations with clients about how anyone can build a business, but any business can be broken, but your brand can't. If you build a really strong brand and brand foundation, it doesn't matter what's happening in the economy and in your industry, you can remain strong because you have such a solid foundation that connects to humans rather than connecting to, metrics or bottom line. Like it all ends up connecting, but you can build something so much stronger. And so my initial mission and why was that I just wanted to share that the world really needs your brand, not your business. And here's why: because you can make a bigger impact, you can stay strong, you can evolve and flow and flex with everything that's going on in the world. And so that's what I wanted my podcast to be about. So season 1 was all of these bite-sized pieces of as a brand strategist who's been doing this for this long, here's how to build an unbreakable brand. And then the seasons following, I serve specifically women-led companies, so I was able to bring in women who were building unbreakable brands themselves, and each could share a strategy of something that worked for them or that was impactful for them for other people to listen to. So that's what my podcast ended up being about, and it's been amazing, and I really love it. But it was a little bit of like, let's just try it and see what happens at first.
Yeah. And what results have you seen from it? I know I've been talking to a lot of podcasters, and I know even for me, the reason I started this podcast is because I get so many questions that are around growth and strategy and the same. And, and that's why I wanted to have a place for people to come and listen to me without having me to answer every time. So what's been the result for you?
Yeah, so that is very similar. Mm-hmm. The best thing that's happened is that I do have really great SEO going for me in my company. So people will find me that way. But like when you find someone on Google search, you really don't know them that well. Yeah. I mean, other than like, their blog posts and then their Google reviews. And so then people who are finding me that way found the podcast too, since I have it all interlinked. And then they would binge the podcast, at least the first season and going into the second, because the first season was all me. And then they'd book a discovery call. And it was on that call that they'd be like, I binged your podcast. I feel like I already know you. I'm ready to go. Yep. And all of those clients were my highest paying clients who were 10K and above projects. So it was an easy converter for me without me having to do anything. Like I didn't even know this was all happening. And then we get on a call and they're like, ready to roll. And I was like, oh, amazing. So that's how it functions for me. I don't have insane download numbers or like, I record seasonally too, so I don't have that kind of traction you can build with weekly podcasts. But it works for me in this way as a service-based business, directly reinforcing everything I'm doing. But then also like it's integrated in other little ways. Like if you take my brand quiz, you're going to get a welcome series of emails. And then I'm going to send you 1 or 2 podcast episodes that are really good and everyone should listen to in those. And that's another way that people are getting their questions answered. And then the other way it's integrated too is into my personal brand of like, when I've applied for speaking gigs before, I had a lot of experience like being on stage. It was so much easier to secure my first few because I had been on podcasts, but also had a podcast that had decent production and everything. And so it was an easy shoe-in. Like they weren't unsure if I could hold a conversation or, speak. So it's like worked for me in ways that are not, I have a million downloads kind of thing,
Absolutely. And since you are using this to grow your brand and it's complementing your brand, it's doing exactly what it's meant to do, right?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yep.
Yeah, because like we were talking about a couple minutes ago is there really are 2 types of podcasts out there. Ones that are to complement a brand like my podcast, your podcast, and then there's like influencer brands in themselves that are doing their own, like they're creating a brand from the podcast. And I find often what happens is people start those podcasts thinking it is for their brand, but then it ends up being its own brand on accident, right? So that comes back to just creating an unbreakable brand, it just makes sense that your podcast is going to connect with your brand. So what tips do you have for podcasters about creating their own branding and making sure everything is cohesive?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're not going to work with a professional, that's okay. but you could work with a professional. But if you're not going to work with a professional, the first thing I would spend a lot of time on is obviously knowing who you're speaking to, so your audience and your purpose, and actually have that written down. In your business, you've probably created avatars and things like that. You're going to do the same thing for your listeners. And then on top of that, you don't want to dive into the naming of your podcast, I would say, until you've started to flesh out that part, because it's going to inform it. And then when you are thinking of a name for your podcast, it's kind of a bigger task. But like for me, I did want to trademark it. So I was running all these names by my trademark lawyer to make sure it was clear and ready for me to use. But on top of that, I didn't want to pick something that was going to really pigeonhole me in terms of my content and topics. So I think it's important, like I could have, said something very specific about design or brands or things like that, but I wanted it to be a little bit more open-ended in a statement, or like your name is more describing a place where a good conversation might happen. And so I think having a little bit more of a big picture view of your name is going to be helpful for longevity purposes so that you can let it grow with you. And then once that's established, then you can dive into the visual pieces of things. And like I said earlier, in terms of like, what's the basics that you need? You need a logo suite. And I say suite because you shouldn't just have one mark. You need a stacked mark, a longer mark, and then a badge of some kind. And then you also need to have a color palette you're going to stick with. I love it when brands pull half their color palette from their current business and then bring in a few others for their podcast. It's like an easy formula of like keeping your podcast a little bit different looking visually, but still aligned and flowing with your business brand if it's there to support it. And then never have more than 6 colors. Like, you just don't need it. It gets messy. You don't need it. And then also have a font system, but your fonts should not be the same fonts as like your logo fonts. I know a lot of people do that, but you should have a font system that's totally separate. I just recommend like pick a Google font systems or font hierarchies, and you'll find sets that will look good next to your marks. But if they're the same as your marks, then your marks aren't different in any way, and it won't stand out compared to all the other, words you're going to have on your blog posts and transcriptions and all of that sort of thing. So those are your basics. That's what you need. And then also a photo shoot if you plan to have your face on the cover art and like out there. Definitely get a brand photo shoot once you've established your visuals so that you have those supporting elements. If you're not going to have your face out there, that should definitely be a considered choice.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. I know for all of my clients, like, their faces are on their logos, and it's just because we are like small businesses, right? So, and we are the face of the business, but there are like NPR podcasts obviously aren't going to have a person on it just because that is more of like a group of people that are putting the podcast together. So that's really great advice. And I always think of podcasting as like, don't think of it as, okay, I'm going to start a podcast, because that is just like one big piece that you have to like break down into pieces. So recently, before I started this podcast, I did a 20-day to launch a podcast series. And so like day 1 was planning the episodes. Day 2 was format. One of the days was like branding and colors and all of that. So there are steps that come into it, and branding is a big piece that you really need to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the overarching structure that's going to carry you through. And I don't want to neglect and say that your brand is only the visuals. Like, the branding is only the visuals, right. But also like your brand is going to be the intro and outro too. Like, you should have messaging in there that continues to bring in the points that you want your podcast to make. So mine is like, because blending is boring. That's like something I say a lot of, like, why we're talking about this, but it's like a repeatable phrase I can use next to all of my work, and it ends up in my intro too. So I think that that's just an important thing to consider. The messaging is also just as important.
Absolutely. I'm curious, is there anything else you want to talk about when it comes to podcast branding or your own podcast and your growth?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I think you had a question of like, what are some other tips for people getting into podcasting? And I wrote down a couple of things because I thought these might be helpful to hear as someone who was like nervous about starting a podcast. I have 0 audio skills. Like, my skills are fully visual. I completely outsource all editing because like I don't even hear the things people hear, So I think it was just important for me. Someone told me like, it's totally okay to hate your voice at first, because it was so hard for me to re-listen to things. Like, my editor would send it back and I'd be like, I'm sure it sounds great. And they're like, you're sure like you didn't listen to it? Like, I had to convince myself to listen to it, because it can be hard to like hear yourself and be like, wow, I gasp a lot. I'm a gasper. It's a thing I do. I'm sure you'll notice when you edit this.
That's so funny. I haven't noticed.
Oh, well, when you go to edit, I was like listening. I was like, oh my God, that's so annoying. And then also on that same note, like it's okay to ask for help. You don't have to know how to do it all. I know the podcast world can be a little bootstrappy. I know that's not a word, but like you could do it yourself kind of thing. Yeah. And you don't have to like become an audio engineer. You can find someone to help you with certain parts of it. And then the last thing that I would say is just like get the expensive mic. Just get it. Don't mess around with anything else.
I know. Computer microphones are not going to cut it, guys.
No, they're not. They're not going to cut it.
I love those. Those are really great. Those are really great tips. And you've shared so much interesting information on this podcast so far. So thank you for that.
Of course.
All right. I have 8 questions for you in the rapid fire section.
Okay.
So the first one is, what's the first podcast that you listened to?
The very first one, I'm pretty sure, was the Smart Passive Income podcast by Pat Flynn, or it was the Choose 5 podcast. I'm not really sure, but the first podcasts were in the personal finance world, specifically the FIRE world. Amazing.
Do you follow FIRE?
No. Oh, no.
Okay.
I mean, we were trying for a while, but we kind of worked our way out of that. So.
Oh, yeah. There's no way I could ever do that. But
yeah, no.
I help someone start their podcast who does follow the FIRE method. And I'm like, I don't have that much self-control.
It's a lot. Well, funny enough, that was how I started. So when I was teaching, I started blogging about paying off my student loans. And that's how I got into the personal finance world, was people noticed my blog. Yeah. And then those were a lot of my first clients were actually from the personal finance world. It's a really cool world. And we were trying the FIRE thing. But yeah, it was just not for us in the end.
That's awesome that you at least tried it. I love that.
Yeah, I gave it a shot.
Yeah. Okay, so besides your own genre of podcasting, what's your favorite podcast genre to listen to?
I love I love a financial podcast, but I also love a comedy / politics podcast. So the ones I'm thinking are I really love The Dollop. It's super funny. They like pick something in history, and then they're comedians, and the one tells about the other one about it, and the other one has no idea what it is. It's really fun. And then the other one I like to listen to is Pod Save America.
Amazing. Cool. Do you have any dream podcast guests?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, I really want to have Jenna Kutcher on my show. Yes. I want to have Barbara Cochran on my show. I'm actually obsessed with her. She's on my mood board on
Amazing.
My phone. I want to have Candace Nelson on my podcast, just like women who have like smashed glass ceilings, like done some incredible things with their brands. And yeah, I mean, I'm just in awe of them. So that would be super cool.
I love that.
Yeah.
So my next question is, what's one podcast you recommend everyone listen to?
I think Radiolab would have to be my answer for that, because they have such interesting formats for their shows, their intros and outros, and like their sound tech was really interesting. I mean, everything they talk about on there is also fascinating, but I thought that it was like the supreme example of high-end production, and so it was helpful to listen to for my own.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that too. That's a great recommendation. So what's your favorite podcast listening platform?
Oh, I'm an Apple Podcast girly all the way.
I love that.
Yeah. I listen to music on Spotify exclusively, but my podcasts are all Apple podcasts. Don't ask me why it is. That's the way it is.
That's so funny. The last person I interviewed today, she was like, I listen to some on Apple, I listen to some on Spotify. Don't ask me why. I just listen to someone, like, however I'm feeling. And I was like, oh my God, I love that. Just like switching back and forth. It works.
Yeah,
right?
That's amazing. It works. I think in my mind, like podcasts don't even exist on Spotify. Obviously, I know they do. Yeah. But like, I just love to separate it out that way.
Yeah,
so
I love that. Okay, great answer. So as a podcast listener, do you have any pet peeves?
I do have a pet peeve. I have 2. Imagine that. The first one is not when it's like bad sound, like if it's a little fuzzy or statically, I don't get annoyed by that. But if it's like insane volume changes, that drives me a little bonkers, like if it goes really loud and really quiet. So that's one of them. And then the other thing is that if someone like leaves their dog or animal making sounds in the background, but then doesn't tell me about their dog or their cat, then I'm like, okay, we can't just ignore that and pretend like that didn't happen. Because I, as an animal person, like I want to hear. You can pause whatever you're saying and tell me about your cat who's meowing in the background, and I would absolutely love that.
So my next question is, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received about podcasting?
The best piece of advice was don't speak. This isn't for you to speak at people. It's not your soapbox. It should directly connect to how you best want to serve people. And I thought that was really impactful piece of advice.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. And then my last question for you is, what's the most surprising thing you've learned about yourself through podcasting?
Well, one, I learned I could do it. And two, I learned that I really love interviewing people. I like being on that side of it. It's so exciting when you ask a question and then someone like says something and you're like, wow, that's so quotable. And you can tell that their like passion and drive is coming through. So I really love that part of it.
Very cool. Oh my gosh, Bethany, I've loved this episode. You've shared so many amazing tips. I love that rapid fire section. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
Yes, I'm just going to leave you with this thought. If you're still on the fence about investing your time and effort and potentially money into the branding portion, a consistently presented brand earns 33% more revenue, and that's the lowest number on the studies. Some studies go up to 55%. And so that consistency across platforms and visuals and in how you're communicating all goes hand in hand and can directly affect your success and your financials. So I'd like to leave everyone listening with that bit.
Oh my gosh. Well, that makes so much sense because of what we were saying of like, sometimes there's so many podcasts that cover the same topic out there, right? And one of the things that makes you stand out is, of course, having great content in the episodes, but also how you present yourself online. And one of my pet peeves, like we were just saying, podcast pet peeves, is when someone has a new podcast episode up and they aren't doing anything other than saying that they have a new episode. They're not telling what the episode is about. They don't have, and sometimes that's because they don't have the templates created to be able to promote it. Sometimes they don't have quote cards. Sometimes they don't have like descriptions. Sometimes they don't know how to cut clips from and that's totally fine. But the easier you make it for yourself, the better it's going to be to promote it. And then also on the flip side, if you have great graphics, your guests are going to want to share it too. And if you have great branding, such as, you know, maybe you even write the description of the podcast in your brand voice and then send that to the guest to post, like the easier you can make it, the better it will be.
Yes. Oh my gosh, 100%. Also, someone who's been a podcast guest and cares a lot about design, if you share ugly graphics with me, I will remake my own. I think and that's just because I'm a designer, but other people are not going to do that. They're just not going to share.
Yeah, no, that's so true. That's so true. One of the first things I did to build up my podcast business was offer free strategy calls for podcasters. And so I looked at like their content, the quality, and then also how they're showing up in their marketing. And every single person I was talking to, I was like, wow, this marketing piece is where, and it's I understand it's not the easiest part to figure out. And so definitely working with an expert like you, Bethany, makes it easier.
Yeah. Yes, that's my goal, is to make it just a little bit easier. And working with someone like you who can give them all the pieces and edit it so it sounds amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Well, on that note, where can people connect with you, Bethany?
Yeah, so you can find my brand and web design agency. I'm at bethanyworks.com. And then on the gram, I'm Bethany Works Design. That's my most active platform. I also have my podcast website, so unbreakablebrands.com, or on the gram, it's Unbreakable Brands Pod. And then I'm also on TikTok, just as Bethany McCamish. It's my personal brand account, and that's all the lifestyle-y things. So if you like animals and travel, then that's where to see me over there.
Awesome. Well, I'll put all of those links in the show notes. And thanks so much for joining me. I've loved this conversation, and I know the audience is going to get a lot of value from this.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Thank you so much for joining me in the Podcast Cafe. I hope you're leaving with fresh ideas and inspiration to take your podcast to the next level. Remember, podcasting is a journey and you don't have to do it alone. I'm here to help you every step of the way. Let's connect. Be sure you follow me on Instagram at Espresso Podcast Production or visit espressopodcastproduction.com for more tips, resources, and behind the scenes insights. I'd love to hear about your podcasting journey. If you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling extra generous, I'd love it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps more podcasters just like you find the show. Until next time, grab your coffee, keep creating, and I'll see you back here in the Podcast Cafe.